The morning sun of what was supposed to be the happiest weekend of my life poured through the kitchen window, bathing everything in a soft, forgiving gold. It was a liar, that light. It promised warmth and new beginnings, but a strange, cold knot was tightening in my stomach, a feeling I hadn't been able to shake for weeks. I ignored it, the way a person ignores the first tremor before the earthquake. My hands, mapped with the fine lines of 68 years, moved on their own, performing a ritual as old as my son's life. Flour, water, yeast, salt. And rosemary. Always rosemary. The fragrant scent of it filled my small, quiet house, a green, earthy perfume that clung to the curtains and settled in the wood of the floorboards. This was my signature, rosemary bread. I baked it for birthdays, for Christmases, and for any day that needed a little more love. Tomorrow, my son, Mark, was getting married. This loaf was for the rehearsal dinner tonight. A final piece of me for his old life before he started his new one. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece in the adjoining living room. It was a shrine to him. There he was at 5, missing 2 front teeth and holding a terrified-looking frog. There he was at 16, impossibly tall and awkward in his prom tuxedo. And there, in the largest silver frame, was his college graduation photo. His smile was bright, full of the easy confidence I'd spent my entire life trying to build for him, brick by painstaking brick. One of those bricks was the down payment on the condo in Lincoln Park. A sleek, modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stole your breath. I'd cashed out the bonds my own parents had left me, the nest egg I was supposed to grow old on, and handed him the check with a trembling hand. Every man needs a castle, Mark, I'd told him, my voice thick with unshed tears. This is your start. He'd hugged me, his strong arms wrapping around my small frame, and whispered, "Thank you, Mom. You're the best. The best." The words echoed in the quiet kitchen. Then came the wedding. Jessica, his fiancée, had tastes that ran expensive. Her parents, the Sterlings, were old money, the kind that was whispered about in the society pages. They made it clear, in the politest, most cutting way possible, that while they would graciously attend, the financial details were best left to us. To me. So I did it. I took out a reverse mortgage on this house, the only home I'd ever known, the place I'd brought Mark home to from the hospital. The historic country club on the North Shore, the 10-piece band, the ridiculously delicate floral arrangements that cost more than my first car, I paid for it all. I paid for it because I wanted Mark to stand tall beside them, to feel like he belonged, to never for a second feel like he was less than them. I wanted to give him a perfect day, a perfect life, a foundation so strong that no storm could ever shake it. I was buying his happiness, and the cost didn't matter. I slid the heavy loaf into the preheated oven and closed the door with a soft click. The clock on the wall ticked, each second a tiny hammer against the silence. It was all done. The checks were written, the dress was steamed, the rings were polished. All that was left was to watch my son walk into his future. So why did it feel like I was preparing for a funeral? Maybe it was Jessica. She was beautiful, intelligent, and ambitious. But when she looked at me, her cool blue eyes didn't see a mother. They saw a relic. A sweet, simple woman with flour on her apron who belonged to a past Mark was rapidly outgrowing. In her presence, I felt my world shrink, my opinions become quaint anecdotes, my love an inconvenient, slightly embarrassing antique. I wiped my hands on my apron, the knot in my stomach twisting tighter. I told myself it was just nerves. A mother's anxiety. It was natural to feel a little sad, a little left behind. He was building his own world now, an empire, as Jessica liked to call it. And in that gleaming, steel and glass empire, there was perhaps less and less room for a small, rosemary-scented kitchen. I had to believe it was worth it. All the secrets I'd kept, all the truths I'd buried, all the pieces of myself I had sacrificed on the altar of his well-being, it had to be worth it. I had protected him, kept him safe from a past he knew nothing about. I had given him the illusion of a perfect childhood, a heroic father, a life untouched by darkness. That was my gift to him. A lifetime of gifts. A car door slammed outside, the sound sharp and intrusive. I glanced through the window. It was Mark's sleek, black sedan. They were early. My heart gave a little flutter of joy, pushing the anxiety away. He'd come for the bread. He'd come to see his mom. I smoothed my apron, took a deep breath to calm my foolish nerves, and walked to the front door, my face already arranged into the loving, happy smile he expected. The smile I had perfected over 35 years. I opened the door, ready to welcome my son. Ready for the beginning of the end. Mark, you're early. My practiced smile clicked into place. And Jessica, hello, dear. Mark stood on the doorstep, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored gray suit, but his eyes wouldn't quite meet mine. They darted from my face to a spot somewhere over my shoulder. Jessica was beside him, a vision in a cream-colored sheath dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a chignon so perfect it looked like spun glass. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Eleanor, she said, her voice smooth as silk. That bread smells rustic. How lovely. Rustic. The word hung in the air, a tiny, perfectly aimed dart. It meant simple. It meant common. It meant not us. Come in, I said, stepping back and holding the door wider. It's just about to come out of the oven. Mark stepped inside, his shoulders seeming too broad for the cozy hallway. He smelled of expensive cologne and ambition. Jessica followed, but she didn't move further into the house. She stood just inside the door as if afraid the atmosphere might cling to her designer dress. Her gaze swept over the living room, over the faded chintz armchair I loved, over the worn spines of the books on my shelves, and lingered for a second too long on the photos on the mantel. It wasn't a glance, it was an appraisal. A dismissal. Everything's all set for tomorrow then? I asked, trying to fill the tense silence. No last-minute panics? Everything is handled, Jessica said coolly. My mother's coordinator is a miracle worker. She turned to Mark, placing a proprietary hand on his arm. We can't stay long, darling. We have the seating chart to finalize with the Sterling's party. She said it as if I were a stranger, a caterer delivering an order. Not the mother of the groom, not the woman who had paid for this miracle worker. I felt a familiar sting, but I pushed it down. This was his day. Their day. Of course. I'm just so happy for you both. My voice was thinner than I wanted it to be. I looked at my son, searching his face for a flicker of connection, of the boy who used to run into this kitchen for hugs. This is everything I ever wanted for you, Mark. That's when Jessica's polite mask dropped, replaced by a look of predatory opportunity. Well, that's sweet, Eleanor. But the thing is, she paused, her smile turning sharp. Your wants are a little different from ours. She squeezed Mark's arm. Mark, darling, tell your mother. Tell her that her idea of family is a bit outdated. We're building an empire, not baking bread. The words were a slap. The air crackled. I stared at her, then my eyes flew to Mark, my silent plea screaming across the room. Say something. Defend me. Defend us. He finally looked at me. And in his eyes, I didn't see my son. I saw a man I didn't know, a stranger caught between the woman who gave him life and the woman who was giving him the life he craved. I saw him take a shallow breath. I saw him make his choice. Mom, he began, and the word was flat, hollowed out. He looked away from me, towards the window, as if he couldn't bear to see my face when he said it. Jessica's right. Things are different now. A cold dread, heavier than any I had ever known, began to seep into my bones. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like a bomb. He turned back, his expression hardened into a mask of grim resolution. You asked what you could do for us. For the wedding. I could only nod, my throat too tight to form words. Want to give me a wedding gift? He asked, his voice low and steady, each word a perfectly polished stone dropped into a deep well. Get out of my life. The world tilted. The cheerful, sunlit kitchen seemed to warp and bend at the edges. I must have misheard. I had to have misheard. My son, my Mark, would never. He wasn't finished. The final, killing blow was yet to come. He took a step closer, his face a contortion of long-simmering resentment I had never known existed. You're the worst mother ever. Silence. Absolute, profound, soul-shattering silence. The only sound was the frantic, useless beating of my own heart and the triumphant little exhale from Jessica. The scent of rosemary and yeast, the smell I had always associated with love and home, suddenly turned rancid in my nostrils, thick and suffocating. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sound, a gasp, a sob, anything. Mark didn't flinch. He just stood there, his judgment delivered. He turned, his back to me, and walked out the door. Jessica gave me one last, fleeting look. It was a look of pure, unadulterated victory. Then she followed him, her heels clicking smartly on the porch steps. They didn't take the bread. The front door closed with a soft, final thud. It sounded like a coffin lid sealing shut. And I was the one inside, buried alive in the ruins of the life I had built, with his last words echoing in the darkness. The worst mother ever. For a long time, I didn't move. I stood rooted to the linoleum floor of my kitchen, a statue of a mother, listening to the silence they had left behind. The silence was a physical thing, a heavy blanket pressing down, suffocating the air. The timer on the oven beeped, a shrill, cheerful sound that was an obscenity in the tomb my home had become. Mechanically, my body took over. I put on my oven mitts, the faded floral pattern mocking me, and pulled out the loaf of bread. It was perfect. The crust was a deep, burnished gold, the rosemary sprigs crisped on top. The smell, so warm and comforting just minutes ago, now made my stomach churn with nausea. I set the hot pan on the cooling rack, and the small, domestic sound of the metal clinking against the wire grid was deafening. Then the shock began to recede, and the pain rolled in. It wasn't a sharp, clean pain. It was a flood. A black, icy wave that started in my chest and spread through my veins, chilling me from the inside out. My knees buckled. I sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs, my hands falling limp in my lap. The worst mother ever. The words weren't just an insult. They were a verdict. A judgment on my entire existence. My life's work, my magnum opus, was my son. And he had just declared it a failure. The sun began to set, painting the walls in strokes of orange and purple, but I didn't turn on the lights. I let the darkness creep in, welcoming it. The house grew cold around me. I started to drift, unmoored from the present, pulled back into the undertow of the past. The memories came not as gentle waves of nostalgia, but as jagged shards of glass. I was 28, standing in this very kitchen. Richard, my husband, Mark's heroic, sainted father, was angry. I don't remember why. The reasons were never important. His hand shot out, not to hit my face, he was always careful about marks that showed, but to grip the delicate bones of my wrist. I saw a flash of his handsome face, twisted into something ugly, his voice a low growl. "Don't you ever contradict me in front of my son again, Eleanor. Do you understand?" The pain was white-hot, but the humiliation was worse. Little Mark was in the living room, watching cartoons. He hadn't seen a thing. I had made sure of it. I was 32. We were at a company picnic. Richard was charming everyone, laughing, flipping burgers on the grill. The perfect husband, the perfect father. Earlier that morning, he'd thrown a coffee mug against the wall, missing my head by inches because his toast was too brown. I spent the rest of the day smiling, my heart a terrified bird trapped in my ribs, a piece of ceramic shrapnel still lodged in the plaster behind the spice rack, a secret I would paint over a dozen times. I was 34. I found myself in a hospital emergency room at 2 in the morning, cradling my arm. I told the nurse I had fallen down the stairs. It was a plausible lie. We had stairs. The doctor, a kind woman with tired eyes, looked at the X-ray showing the clean, sharp break in my radius. Then she looked at the fading yellow and purple bruises on my upper arm, shaped distinctly like fingers. She didn't say anything. She just set the bone and gave me a pamphlet for a women's shelter, tucking it discreetly into my purse. I threw it in a trash can on the way to the car. Where would I go? How would I provide for Mark? Richard was a success. He was everything. I was nothing. And the lie. The lie that became the cornerstone of Mark's life. Richard's death. It wasn't a tragic accident. It was a drunk driving crash. He was alone in the car, coming home from a business dinner that I knew was with another woman, his blood alcohol level 3 times the legal limit. He wrapped his new BMW around an oak tree. I sanitized the story for my 7-year-old son. Daddy was a hero, I told him, my voice breaking with a grief that was more for my lost life than for my lost husband. He worked so hard for us, and he was so tired, he fell asleep. I had built a myth for Mark to live in. A world where his father was a god and his mother was the quiet, devoted caretaker of his legacy. I sacrificed the truth for his happiness. I erased my own suffering so he would have none. I remained silent so he could believe in a beautiful world. All those years of silence. All the swallowed tears, the hidden bruises, the lonely nights spent praying he would grow up to be nothing like his father. All of it for him. And my reward? Get out of my life. You're the worst mother ever. The lie hadn't protected him. It had poisoned him. It had allowed him to see my sacrifice not as strength, but as weakness. My quiet endurance looked like passivity. My simple life, a life I kept small and safe for his sake, looked like a lack of ambition. Jessica, with her sharp edges and shiny, brutal world, was the opposite of everything I stood for. Of course, he chose her. She was a reflection of the hero father he thought he had. Strong, uncompromising, ruthless. Sometime after midnight, the tears finally stopped. An eerie calm settled over me. The pain was still there, a great, hollow cavern in my chest, but something else was crystallizing within it. A cold, hard clarity. I had spent 40 years being a victim. First Richard's, then my own griefs, and now my son's. I had lived in the shadows, making myself smaller and smaller until I had almost disappeared entirely. But I wasn't gone yet. I stood up, my joints cracking in protest. I walked through the dark house and into my small office. I turned on the desk lamp, the sudden pull of light making me blink. I sat down and looked at the phone. My hand, steady now, reached for it. The illusion was shattered. The myth was dead. The life I had built for him was a lie that had turned on its creator. Fine. If he wanted me out of his life, I would get out. But I would not go quietly into the night. I would not just fade away. He wanted me gone? I would be gone. But first, I would dismantle the world I had so carefully, so foolishly, built for him. Brick by brick. The dawn broke gray and indifferent, the sky the color of ash. I hadn't slept. I'd spent the last few hours sitting in the dark, the cold clarity hardening into something diamond-sharp inside me. Grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. Action was the only anesthetic that would work now. I showered and dressed, not in the soft pastels I'd chosen for the wedding, but in a pair of practical slacks and a crisp, white blouse. It was armor. I made a pot of coffee, the aroma strong and bitter, and drank it black, standing by the kitchen counter. The loaf of rosemary bread was still on the rack, a cold, silent accusation. I picked it up, walked it to the outside trash bin, and dropped it inside without a flicker of sentiment. The thud it made was satisfyingly final. At exactly 8 a.m., I made my first call. My fingers were steady as I dialed the number for A Perfect Day, the ridiculously expensive wedding planning service Jessica had insisted on. A bright, chirpy voice answered. A perfect day, this is Tiffany. It's a beautiful day for the Vance Sterling wedding. Tiffany, I said, my voice low and even, devoid of any emotion. This is Eleanor Vance. Oh, Mrs. Vance. Good morning. We are just putting the final touches on everything. The hydrangeas are to die for. There's been a change of plans, I said, cutting through her effervescence. The wedding is cancelled. Silence. Then a nervous laugh. Oh, you jokers. The groom's mother with the pre-wedding jitters, I love it. Is this about the seating for your cousin Martha? Because we can. This is not a joke, Tiffany, I stated, my tone leaving no room for argument. The event scheduled for today at the Lakeshore Country Club for Mark Vance and Jessica Sterling is cancelled. Effective immediately. Cancelled? But, Mrs. Vance, all the vendors are on their way. The deposits, everything is non-refundable. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. This was the part she thought would stop me. The part where the sensible, frugal woman she thought I was would gasp and reconsider. I am aware, I said calmly. Send me a final, itemized bill for any outstanding charges. You have my address. But the guests. The bride. Mr. Vance, she stammered, her professional poise completely shattered. That is not your concern, I said, and before she could sputter another protest, I hung up. One brick removed. I took another sip of coffee. The caffeine hit my system, sharpening the edges of my resolve. The second call was harder. This was the big one. I had the business card on my desk, a sleek piece of black cardstock with silver lettering. Julian Croft. Luxury real estate. The top broker in Chicago. I had met him once, when I signed the papers for Mark and Jessica's condo. He had been condescending, barely hiding his surprise that a woman like me could afford such a property. He answered on the second ring, his voice smooth and confident. Julian Croft. Mr. Croft, this is Eleanor Vance. Mrs. Vance. To what do I owe the pleasure? I trust Mark and Jessica are enjoying the condo. He said it like he was the one who had bestowed it upon them. I need to sell it, I said. He chuckled. Moving up already? That's the spirit. Well, the market is strong, but a quick flip isn't always. No, Mr. Croft, I interrupted. You misunderstand. I need to sell it now. Today. I want it listed before noon. The silence on his end was heavier this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his shrewd, calculating mind. Eleanor, is there some kind of trouble? A distressed sale will significantly impact the asking price. We're talking a potential loss of $100,000, maybe more, for a sale this immediate. The price is not my primary concern. Speed is, I replied, my voice as flat as a prairie highway. I want the fastest possible cash offer. No contingencies. I am authorizing you to accept a significant discount for a quick close. But the furnishings, the couple's personal belongings, will be removed, I said. The apartment will be empty by the end of the day. He was quiet for a moment longer. The broker in him was smelling a massive, easy commission, but the man in him was clearly baffled. I see. I'll need you to sign the listing agreement. I can have a courier bring it to you this morning. I'll be in your office in 30 minutes, I said, and hung up. The final brick. The foundation of their perfect life. The castle I had built for them, about to be turned back into dust and paper. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink, placing it carefully in the dish drainer. I looked around my small, quiet house. For years, it had felt like a waiting room. A place where I waited for Mark to call, waited for him to visit, waited for him to need me. Now, it felt different. It felt like a launching pad. My purse was on the table. I picked it up, my car keys jingling softly in my hand. As I walked to the door, I didn't glance at the mantelpiece. The photos there were of a boy who no longer existed, and a mother who was dead and gone. The woman walking out the door was someone new. Someone I hadn't met yet. And I was strangely, terrifyingly eager to get to know her. The drive to Julian Croft's office was surreal. The world outside my car windows was stubbornly normal. People were jogging, walking their dogs, heading to Saturday brunch. It was wedding day. Somewhere in a suite at a downtown hotel, Jessica was probably surrounded by bridesmaids, sipping mimosas. Somewhere, Mark was putting on his tuxedo. They were living in a world that, unbeknownst to them, no longer existed. I was the architect of its demolition, and they hadn't even felt the first tremor. Julian Croft's office was all chrome, glass, and hushed ambition. He met me himself, his composure restored, though his eyes were alight with a vulture's curiosity. The papers were ready. I read every line, my old librarian's habit for fine print serving me well. I signed my name, Eleanor Vance, and the elegant, practiced script felt like it belonged to a stranger. I'll have it on the private network within the hour, Julian said, his voice a low purr of efficiency. Cash buyers who love a motivated seller. You'll have offers by midday. Good, I said, standing up. I'll be at the condo overseeing the movers. Contact me there. I didn't wait for his reply. Next, I called a 24-hour moving and storage company, the kind that specializes in emergency relocations. I explained the situation with a calm, practiced lie. A sudden family emergency requires us to vacate the property immediately. I need a full crew. Packing, moving, everything. And I'm willing to pay double the weekend rush rate. Money was a magnificent tool. It made the impossible happen with astonishing speed. Within 90 minutes, a large yellow truck and a team of 4 efficient, silent men met me at the entrance to the gleaming high-rise in Lincoln Park. I used my key to let them into the lobby, the doorman giving me a confused but respectful nod. As the elevator ascended, my phone began to buzz in my purse. I ignored it. The condo was exactly as I'd last seen it. Impersonal, stylish, and cold. Jessica's touch was everywhere. The artfully arranged coffee table books, the single orchid on the marble island, the neutral color palette that screamed expensive taste. There was nothing of Mark here. Nothing of the boy who loved mismatched socks and posters of rock bands. Everything goes, I told the moving crew foreman. Every piece of furniture, every dish, every book. Pack it carefully and take it to the storage unit I've rented. Leave nothing behind. They set to work with a quiet, practiced rhythm. The sound of packing tape being ripped from its dispenser became the soundtrack to my quiet revolution. And then my phone began to scream. It wasn't a buzz anymore. It was a relentless, frantic series of calls and texts. I pulled it from my purse and looked at the screen. Mark, Mom? Tiffany from the wedding planner just called me, freaking out. Said you canceled? This is some kind of sick joke, right? Call me. Mark, seriously, what the hell is going on? Jessica is having a panic attack. Mark, pick up the phone, Mom. Jessica, Eleanor, whatever childish game you are playing, you need to stop it. Now. You are ruining my wedding day. Jessica, I swear to God, Eleanor, if you don't fix this, you will regret it. I read the messages, one after another, and felt nothing. A strange, calm detachment. It was like watching a movie about other people. Their panic was a distant, tinny sound from a world I no longer inhabited. I switched the phone to silent and placed it on the kitchen counter, screen down. The movers were efficient. The living room vanished into a sea of brown cardboard boxes. The bedroom was stripped bare. As they carefully wrapped the artwork Jessica had chosen, my phone buzzed again, vibrating against the cold stone of the countertop. This time, the caller ID read Sarah, my younger sister. I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't talk to her yet. She would ask questions. She would offer comfort. And comfort was a danger to the cold, hard shell I was building around myself. An hour later, Julian Croft called. I answered. You weren't kidding, he said, a note of awe in his voice. I have 3 cash offers. The highest is about 15% below market, but they can wire the funds Monday morning. Take it, I said without hesitation. Draw up the paperwork. Consider it done, he replied. Eleanor. I don't mean to pry, but I hope everything is all right. Everything, I said, looking around the rapidly emptying space, is finally becoming clear. Just as I hung up, a voicemail notification popped up. It was from Sarah. I hesitated, then pressed play, holding the phone to my ear. Her voice was tight with worry. Ellie? It's me. Mark just called me frantic. He was sobbing, said you'd gone crazy, that you were destroying his life. I tried to tell him to calm down, but... Ellie, what did you do? Please call me. I'm worried about you. This isn't like you. She was right. This wasn't like the old me. The old me would have been weeping, apologizing, desperately trying to put the pieces of their world back together. The old me would have absorbed their anger and blame like a sponge. The new me listened to the frantic message, deleted it, and pointed the moving foreman toward the master closet, where Jessica's extensive wardrobe was still hanging. That too, I said. All of it. My silence was no longer passive. It wasn't weakness. It was a fortress. And from behind its high, impenetrable walls, I was systematically taking back my life. By late afternoon, the condo was a hollowed-out shell. The movers had finished, their footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness as they carried out the last box. I signed their invoice, added a generous tip, and watched the yellow truck pull away from the curb, carrying the entire contents of a life that was supposed to have started today. I was alone. The floor-to-ceiling windows, once a selling point, now seemed to mock the vacancy, letting in vast, unforgiving swaths of the gray Chicago sky. Dust motes danced in the fading light. Without the carefully chosen furniture and rugs, every scuff on the hardwood floor, every tiny imperfection in the plaster, was exposed. The place looked less like a home and more like a crime scene. I walked through the empty rooms, my sensible shoes making soft, solitary taps on the floor. This was where their king-size bed was supposed to be, the one Jessica had ordered from a catalog that looked more like a museum brochure. This was where the nursery would have gone, a small, bright room with a view of the park. My breath hitched for a moment, a phantom pain for a grandchild I would never know. I leaned against the doorframe, allowing myself that one flicker of sorrow. I had pictured myself here, in this room, rocking a baby, telling it stories. A quiet, useful grandmother. It was a dream, like any other. And now it was gone. I pushed the feeling away, burying it deep. I wasn't here to mourn. I was here to say goodbye. Not to them, but to the dream of them. To the version of myself who believed her happiness was contingent on theirs. I walked into the center of the vast living room, the space where a plush, off-white sofa and a Persian rug I'd paid for were meant to anchor the room. The air was cool and still. I could almost hear the ghosts of their future laughter, the clinking of champagne glasses, the conversations that would never happen. I had imagined them hosting parties here, Mark looking proud and successful, Jessica by his side, elegant and poised. I had imagined myself visiting on holidays, bringing my rosemary bread, a quaint and tolerated visitor from another world. The delusion was so powerful, so complete. It was a shock it had shattered so easily. From my large handbag, the one I always carried, I took out a small, heavy object. It was an old wooden box, dark cherry wood polished to a soft sheen by the passage of time. It had been my mother's jewelry box, but I never kept jewelry. I kept other things. Things heavier than gold or diamonds. I knelt, my knees protesting, and placed the box squarely in the center of the floor. It sat there, small and dark against the lightwood, a focal point in the emptiness. It looked like a heart, ripped out and left behind. This was the final act. Not of revenge, but of release. For 35 years, I had carried the contents of this box inside me, a toxic secret that had corroded my soul. I had guarded it, protected it, all for him. All to preserve the myth of his father and the fiction of his perfect life. My son had asked for a gift. He had asked me to get out of his life. I had obliged. The apartment was sold. The wedding was canceled. I was about to walk out of this empty space and never return. But I would not carry this burden with me. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to him. I stood up and looked at the box one last time. It seemed to hum with the stored energy of decades of pain and silence. It was a bomb, and I had just set the timer. I turned and walked toward the door, my posture straighter than it had been in years. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. I let myself out, the lock clicking shut behind me with a sound of absolute finality. I dropped my key to the condo and the building's main entrance on the doorman's desk. "I won't be needing these anymore," I said to his confused face. As I walked out onto the Chicago street, the wind whipping at my coat, I felt a strange and terrible lightness. The kind a soldier must feel after the battle is over, when the silence that follows the cannons is more deafening than the noise. The war was over. I had lost everything I thought I wanted. And I had never felt more free. The box was not hidden. It sat on the top shelf of the linen closet in my bedroom, behind a stack of old, soft quilts that I never used. It had been there for 25 years, a silent, dormant tumor in the heart of my home. In the pre-dawn hours of that Saturday morning, after the long night of dead memories had passed and the cold dawn of resolve had broken, I knew it was time. I didn't need a stepladder. I could reach it easily. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cool wood. It was heavier than it looked, weighted not by its contents, but by the years of silence they represented. I carried it to the kitchen table and sat down, the first gray light of morning filtering through the window. For a moment, I just looked at it. I hadn't opened it since the day I'd put the last item inside, the day after Richard's funeral. Opening it now felt like exhuming a body. My own. My hands were steady as I lifted the delicate brass latch. The lid opened with a soft sigh of displaced air, releasing a faint, musty scent of old paper and dried tears. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay the artifacts of a life I had survived. This was my gift to my son. The truth. The first thing I touched was a folded, yellowing piece of paper. It was a carbon copy, the type thin as an onion skin. A police report, dated 25 years ago. I didn't need to read it. I knew the words by heart. Domestic dispute. Verbal altercation. No charges filed. Such sterile, bloodless words for the terror of that night. Richard had backed me into a corner, his face inches from mine, his voice a venomous whisper, promising to ruin me if I ever tried to leave. I had screamed. The neighbors had called the police. By the time the two young, uncomfortable officers arrived, Richard was the picture of calm concern, explaining that his wife was hysterical and prone to exaggeration. They had looked from his handsome, plausible face to my tear-streaked, terrified one, and they had believed him. The report was a testament not to a crime, but to my failure to be believed. Beneath it was another document, this one from the County General Hospital emergency room. It was a medical record for Eleanor Vance. Diagnosis: fracture, distal radius. Multiple contusions, upper arms and torso. I traced the clinical, typed words with my finger. Contusions. A medical term for the violent, purple blooms left by a man's angry grip. Fracture. The clean snap of bone that had resulted from my fall down the stairs. I could still feel the phantom ache in my wrist, the sickening memory of the kind doctor's eyes, full of a pity I couldn't accept. Next was the restraining order. A crisp, legal document I had obtained in secret from a pro bono lawyer in a downtown office I prayed Richard would never find out about. I had filled it out, detailing the threats, the violence, the fear. But I had never filed it. The piece of paper felt like a flimsy shield against a hurricane. To serve it to him would be a declaration of war, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that it was a war I would not survive. He had told me as much. This house is mine. My son is mine. You're mine, he'd said. The only way you leave is in a box. The unused order was a monument to my own cowardice, a symbol of how completely he had trapped me. Then came the photographs. I had taken them with a cheap Polaroid camera I kept hidden in my car. They weren't many. Just a few, taken on the worst nights. I spread them out on the table. The first was of a young woman with a blooming black eye, her lips swollen. She was trying to smile, a pathetic attempt to prove she was okay, but her eyes were wide with a haunted, animal fear. It was me at 30. Another showed a long, ugly gash on my forearm, hastily bandaged, from where he'd hurled a crystal ashtray. The final one was just my reflection in the bathroom mirror. There were no visible marks on my face, but the woman staring back was a ghost. Her soul had been hollowed out, leaving only a shell of quiet despair. And last, at the very bottom, was the letter. It was written on a single sheet of my good stationery, the one with the embossed daisies at the top. The ink was slightly faded, my handwriting shaky. I had written it one night when Mark was 5, after Richard had locked me out of the house in the freezing rain for hours because dinner was late. I had sat in my car, shivering, convinced he was finally going to kill me. The letter was my only weapon. It began, "To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, I am probably dead. Please know that it was not an accident. My husband, Richard Vance, has been abusing me for years. Tonight, he told me that if I ever tried to take our son, Mark, and leave, he would find me and kill me. I believe him. I am too scared to go to the police. He is a respected man, and I am just his wife. But I want someone to know the truth. I want my son to one day know that I didn't abandon him. I loved him more than my own life. Please, tell my son I love him." It was unfinished. He had eventually unlocked the door, laughing as I stumbled inside, and my moment of courage had evaporated. I had hidden the letter, a final, desperate message in a bottle from a drowning woman. I carefully gathered the items, the reports, the order, the photos, the letter. I placed them back inside the box in a precise order, the letter on top. This was the story. My story. The one I had hidden from the world and, most of all, from my son. I closed the lid. The latch clicked shut. The truth was now contained, ready for delivery. I was no longer its keeper. I was merely the courier. The for sale sign hammered into the lawn of my small, tidy house was the last nail in the coffin of my old life. I had signed the papers with the same real estate agent who was handling the condo sale. Another quick, discounted deal for a cash buyer. He thought I was a madwoman. Perhaps I was. I sat in my packed car at the end of the driveway, the engine off. The sky had finally broken, and the first drops of rain began to fall, fat and slow, streaking down the glass like tears I no longer had to shed. This was it. The movers had taken the few boxes of belongings I cared to keep. The rest, the furniture, the dishes, the life I had lived within those walls, had been donated. I was a ghost leaving a haunted house. I had no destination, only a direction, west. Towards the ocean. Towards a place where no one knew my name or the story I had carried. My phone, which had been silent for hours, lit up on the passenger seat. The screen glowed with a name I once thought was synonymous with my own heart. Mark. For a moment, I just watched it, the name pulsing in the gray light of the car. All day, I had ignored them. All day, I had been the architect, the planner, the demolitions expert. My work was done now. The gift had been delivered. This, I knew, was the call of receipt. My hand was steady as I lifted it. I pressed the green icon. I didn't say hello. I just waited. The first thing I heard wasn't a voice. It was a sound. A sharp, ragged intake of breath, followed by a choked, horrified sob. It was Jessica. The sound was ugly, stripped of all her poise and calculation. It was the raw sound of shock. Then a heavy, static-filled silence stretched across the line. In that silence, I could picture the scene perfectly. The two of them standing in that vast, empty living room. The small wooden box open on the floor. The yellowed papers and faded photographs scattered around it like fallen leaves from a dead tree. When he finally spoke, his voice was so broken, so utterly ravaged, that it took me a second to recognize it. It was my son's voice, but it was the voice of the 7-year-old boy I had lied to after his father's funeral. Thin, cracked, unrecognizable. "Mom?" he whispered, the word a shard of glass. I said nothing. The box, he stammered. "We found a box." I waited. I heard another shuffling sound, another choked gasp from Jessica. Then Mark's voice came again, lower this time, filled with a dawning horror so profound it seemed to suck the air from my own lungs. "Mom?" "That scar, on your wrist," he said, his voice barely audible. "The one you always said was from a hot pan when I was little, when you were making my birthday cake." I closed my eyes. I could feel the phantom ache of it, the memory of Richard's hand twisting, the sharp, sickening snap. "That wasn't a pan, was it?" he whispered. "It was him." The word hung in the air between us. Him. The hero. The myth. The god whose legacy I was accused of tarnishing. A single tear, hot and unexpected, escaped my eye and traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. The final poison leaving my system. I took a quiet breath. My voice, when it came, was a whisper, but it carried across the line with the weight of a granite tombstone. "Yes, Mark," I said. "It's true." I didn't say another word. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize for my silence. I just gave him the truth he had never asked for, the truth he had punished me for protecting him from. I pressed the red icon, severing the connection. I sat there for a long moment as the rain began to fall harder, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof of the car. There was no scream. Not on the phone. But I had heard it anyway. It was the silent, internal shriek of a life built on a lie collapsing in on itself. The sound of a carefully constructed temple crashing down into dust. The sound of a hero turning into a monster. The sound of a son's world ending. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine came to life with a quiet hum. Wipers cleared the rain from my view. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, away from the house, away from the life that was no longer mine. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there left to see. The first 100 miles were a blur. Illinois flattened into an endless, rain-slicked ribbon of asphalt, flanked by the skeletal remains of last year's cornfields. The sky was a single, unbroken shade of gray. It was a landscape of erasure, a perfect mirror for the state of my soul. I drove with a steady, unthinking focus of a machine, the rhythmic thump-thump of the wipers counting out a beat for a song I didn't know. There was no triumph in me. No satisfying sting of victory. The space where 40 years of anxiety and fear had lived was now just a great, hollow void. I felt nothing. It was terrifying. I had defined myself for so long by the weight I carried, the weight of my secrets, of Mark's future, of Richard's ghost, that I didn't know who I was without it. I crossed the Mississippi River at dusk, the water a-churning, muddy brown below, and didn't even notice the sign welcoming me to Iowa. I just kept driving. I drove until the gas light came on, then pulled into a faceless travel plaza that smelled of diesel and fried food. I bought a cup of coffee that tasted like hot brown water and a prepackaged sandwich with bread as soft and lifeless as a sponge. I ate in my car, watching massive trucks lumber in and out of the parking lot, their headlights cutting lonely swaths through the darkness. For the first time, I realized I was utterly, completely alone. And I wasn't afraid. That night, I stayed in a cheap motel off the highway. The room was aggressively beige and smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I lay on top of the stiff, questionable bedspread and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The silence here was different from the silence in my house. It wasn't full of ghosts and memories. It was just empty. I slept for 10 hours, a dead, dreamless sleep, and woke up feeling like I had been reborn into a stranger's life. The next day, the landscape began to change. Iowa's gentle hills gave way to the vast, breathtaking emptiness of Nebraska. The sky opened up, a brilliant, impossibly wide blue. I felt my own soul unfurling with it. The hollowness inside me began to fill, not with pain, but with space. Room to breathe. As I drove, the memories started to come back, but they were different now. They weren't jagged shards. They were old photographs I could take out and examine with a new, dispassionate curiosity. I saw myself, a young mother, carefully applying concealer to a bruise on my cheek, telling a 4-year-old Mark that Mommy had been clumsy and bumped into a door. I didn't feel the old shame. I felt a profound, aching pity for that young woman, for how trapped she was, for how fiercely she had tried to protect her child in the only way she knew how. I forgave her. I finally, truly, forgave her for her silence. I thought of Mark. Not the cruel stranger who had disowned me, but the little boy who used to fall asleep with his head in my lap. I had wanted to give him a world without monsters. But in hiding the monster that was his father, I had left him defenseless against the world's real cruelties. I had raised him in a greenhouse, and he had mistaken the glass walls for the whole world. My protection had become his prison, blinding him to true strength, true sacrifice. I had given him a perfect shield, and he had used it as a sword against me. There was a terrible, tragic poetry to it. The anger I expected to feel was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. By the time I reached the stark, majestic plains of Wyoming, I was no longer running from something. I was driving toward something. I felt the weight of years sloughing off me with every mile marker that flew past my window. The identity of Mrs. Richard Vance died somewhere in Iowa. The identity of Mark's mother evaporated over the grasslands of Nebraska. The final ascent into the Rocky Mountains was a physical struggle. The car labored up the steep grades, the engine whining. The air grew thin and cold. I navigated the switchbacks, cliffs falling away on one side, solid rock rising on the other. It felt like a final trial, a battle against the gravity of my own past. And then I was through. I pulled over at a scenic viewpoint. I got out of the car and walked to the railing. The wind was sharp, but the air was cleaner than any I had ever breathed. Below me, the world stretched out, a tapestry of green and gold and blue. I had crossed the Great Divide. The past was behind me, a locked country on the other side of an impassable range. I stood there for a long time, the wind whipping my hair, and I felt a smile spread across my face. It was a real smile, not a practiced one. It started from somewhere deep inside, a place that hadn't been touched in decades. I was not a wife. I was not a mother. I was not a victim. My name was Eleanor. And I was heading home, to a place I had never been before. 6 months later, I was a different woman. I lived in a small town on the Oregon coast, a place where the air was always damp with salt and the dominant sound was the eternal roar and sigh of the Pacific. I had rented a little cedar-shingled cottage perched on a low cliff. It had a small, wild garden that tumbled down towards the sea, full of stubborn roses and hardy lavender that thrived in the misty climate. My life was simple. I woke with the sun, which often just meant a slight lightening of the pearly gray sky. I drank my coffee on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool sweater, watching the waves crash against the black, volcanic rocks below. I had taken a part-time volunteer position at the local library, a tiny, charming building that smelled of old books and wood polish. I recommended novels to quiet teenagers and helped elderly patrons with the computers. My days were measured in the turning of pages and the turning of tides. I was Eleanor. Just Eleanor. The name felt new and clean in my mouth. My neighbors knew me as the quiet woman from the Midwest who was surprisingly good with roses. I had made a few gentle friendships, a chat with the woman who ran the bakery, a shared cup of tea with the head librarian. They didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer it. My life was my own, contained and complete. The hollow void inside me had been filled, not with noise or distraction, but with the steady, quiet rhythm of my own existence. The peace I had found wasn't a fragile thing. It was bedrock, forged in the solitude of the open road and tempered by the relentless power of the ocean. One Tuesday afternoon, I was walking back from the post office, a small bundle of mail in my hand. Bills, a seed catalog, and a single, cream-colored envelope that felt heavier than the rest. I stopped on the path leading to my cottage. The handwriting on the front was achingly familiar. Neat, slanted, precise. Mark. My heart didn't leap. It didn't plummet. It just gave a single, hard thump, like a stone being dropped into a deep well. I had thought about this moment, wondered if it would ever come. I had played out a dozen scenarios in my mind: anger, tears, recriminations, forgiveness. But standing there, with the physical evidence of his existence in my hand, I felt only a profound and weary calm. I went inside, put the kettle on, and sat down at my small kitchen table that looked out over the garden and the sea. I stared at the envelope for a long time. The postmark was from Chicago. He was still there, in the city of ghosts. I ran my thumb over my name, written in his hand. Eleanor Vance. Not Mom. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of salt and brewing Earl Grey, and slit the envelope open with a butter knife. Inside was a single sheet of matching cream-colored paper, folded in 3. I unfolded it. The letter was short. My eyes scanned the words. He wrote that he and Jessica were no longer together. He wrote that he had started therapy. He wrote that there were no words in the English language to express his shame and his sorrow. He wrote that he finally understood what the word hero meant and that he had been worshipping at a false altar his entire life. He wrote that the scar on my wrist was a constant image in his mind. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask for me to come back. He just asked one question at the very end. Are you okay? I read the letter twice. The kettle whistled, a long, piercing cry. I slowly got up and poured the steaming water over the tea bag in my favorite mug. 6 months ago, this letter would have been my salvation. It would have been everything I had ever wanted to hear. The validation. The apology. The proof that my sacrifice had, in the end, meant something. But as I stood there, looking out at the wild, gray ocean, I realized something profound. It didn't matter anymore. His absolution was not a key I needed to unlock my own peace. I had already found the key. I had forged it myself, mile by lonely mile, across a continent. I carried my tea out to the porch and sat in my weathered Adirondack chair. The ocean was restless today, the waves a churning turmoil of white and slate gray. I folded the letter and placed it on the small table beside me. I did not weep with joy. I did not burn with old anger. I felt a quiet, bittersweet sadness for the boy who had to have his world destroyed to finally see the truth. I felt a pang of sorrow for the broken man he had become. But his journey was his own now. I could not walk it for him. A gust of wind rattled the windows of the cottage. I picked up my garden shears, my gaze turning to a defiant rosebush, its crimson blooms a startling slash of color against the gray backdrop. There was a branch that needed pruning, a dead piece of wood that was hindering new growth. The future of my relationship with my son was a vast, uncharted ocean. Perhaps, one day, we would find a way to navigate it. Perhaps not. But my happiness was no longer a distant shore he had to ferry me to. My happiness was right here. In the feel of the cool, damp air on my skin. In the scent of salt and roses. In the quiet strength of my own two hands. I had saved myself. And that was the only victory that had ever truly mattered. I snipped the dead branch from the rosebush, making way for whatever came next.